Hi, everybody. I'm Lily Massa McKinley. I'm the Executive Director for the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative, and we are so excited to be working with our partners from SOVA over this next, 3 months to 6 months to really work with our campus partners around student basic needs. And I know that you all have incredible services and supports that are available to your students to help them with those non-academic barriers, and there are many, and they are very diverse in obstacles that they might be facing. And so this process that we're going to go through together is really to help your campus teams work better together and create, where do you see opportunities for improvement, and then through our partners with SOVA, really kind of help guide and coach your campus team to achieve whatever that next vision is that you hope to accomplish. And of course, like weaving best practices and great ideas and solutions for you throughout as well. Before we get started with turning it over to SOVA to kind of talk about next steps in this process, I did want to share 2 exciting updates from the collaborative. And I hope that you all are a part of our newsletter because we send out a monthly newsletter that has updates about what's happening in the state of higher education in Kentucky. And 2 big things that we'd love to share with you. One of those is a professional development kind of workshop series on student basic needs issues. And we're working with our partners through Complete College America to facilitate 5 of those webinars from February 1st through March 29th. You'll be able to register for those webinars. I'll put the link in the chat here as soon as we get going. And they're on all sorts of different topics related to student basic needs. Scaling mental health services, really leveraging and maximizing emergency aid programs, measuring the impact and the ROI of your student basic needs support services. So all sorts of really important topics that we kind of gathered from our very first Community of Practice meeting in December. So really excited to share that content with you. And we hope that you'll be able to register and join us. And please share that link as broadly as possible with your teams and your cohort, your colleagues on your campuses. And the other, Maisha, I'd actually love to request about 5 minutes at the end of our of your time today, just to kind of introduce these folks to our Impact Exchange online platform for communities of practice. But
no problem. Thanks.
I'll turn it over to you, Maisha, and thank you so much.
Oh, no problem, Lily. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and just the opportunity to be here with all 7 campuses today. We're super excited and geared up to really get the communities of practice started with how to build out your team for the continuous improvement, doing the continuous improvement work. So I'll just begin by introducing myself. I'm Maisha Carter. I am a program manager with SOVA, and my role with the Kentucky Collaborative simply is being a support they need for many of the Launchpad activities, such as the communities of practice teams and activities. So today we're going to be starting with just that. And my partner, Paul, you will hear him jump in from time to time. I'll let him introduce himself when if he's there.
I am. Hi, everybody. I was, if you remember, I was with you on the first call that we had when we sort of opened up the invitation to join the community of practice. It's again great to be with you. This is just a slightly different today than normal. I'm off camera. I had I can't see well. I had a procedure this morning, but normally I would be here alongside Maisha, of course, backing her up, and we'll be here going forward. The only one change that this will require is normally I would be keeping a close eye on chat, so if you have things that you want to ask, normally I would say drop them in chat, we'll get to it. But in this case, if you could just, we don't take any offense to you just interrupting, to speak up and say, hey, what about this or what about that? And we'll be happy to stop and address any question or concern you might have. So again, great to be with you.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. And he just alluded to just the very thing that I was getting ready to touch on, which is the December invitation interest in communities of practice. So many of you may have been with us in that December call, but if you weren't, no worries. We're gonna catch you up. For the purposes of today, we are essentially going to review some of the pieces that we touched on in terms of the continuous improvement approach. We're going to look at what that looks like. We are going to really focus on the work of building your continuous improvement team, and then we're gonna talk through some practical strategies and challenges that may arise, and what are the next steps. So essentially, it's a conversation, and so we want you to be able to walk away with the tools that you need to be able to build the team, and then just open up the space so that you can be able to ask the questions that are needed to be able to be confident in being able to build that team for your campus. Does that sound okay with everybody? And again, it's a conversation, so you can come off and mute at any time, so you don't have to stay muted. So for those of you who attended that opening Communities of Practice Interest meeting in December, this will be a review around the continuous improvement approach. And for those that are new, like I said, no worries, we're going to catch you up. Essentially, the continuous improvement approach, it emphasizes a cyclical approach that addresses those wicked problems. So wicked problems, as we know, to be those issues that plague our campuses that don't have simple solutions, that have really, that sometimes have complex connections, complex relationships. But what continuous improvement does for us, it allows us to address those wicked problems through this idea around shared learning. And so we ask the big questions. What are the big drivers? What are the next steps for improving? Not so much in the outcomes-based system, but we're looking at a cycle of what are the big drivers on and next steps to being able to address those wicked problems and come up with solutions for them. What are we learning? And how do we apply what we're learning? So we do that through a cycle. The tools that we need to support the work for your team or the team that you're building, we're going to take a brief look at them. There are only two. There's a driver diagram and there's a continuous improvement cycle template. And we'll look at the samples for both of those. So your driver diagram essentially has 4 parts. It has your aim, which is that's your goal. So what are we trying to accomplish? That's the question that you're asking your team, or the problem that we're trying to solve, the wicked problem, essentially. And that's going to be guided by your SMART goal, which is essentially, it's a high level improvement goal. And we know SMART goals to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and on a reasonable timeline that makes sense for your team. And then we're to break that down into what are the potential barriers there? What's in the way? What could potentially be blocking our progress toward that SMART goal? And then we have the improvement projects. And this is what we're going to lay out actually on, this is the meat that goes onto the continuous improvement cycle. And so this is the actual work, because it's the meat. So that's the work that's driving the change. And so this is just a sample of what the driver diagram can look like. Of course, it's going to be it's campus-based, based on what your priority and the needs are on your campus. And so, it's going to be individualized based upon your individual needs. And then there's the actual continuous improvement cycle. So that cycle, like I said, it's a cyclical approach. And so that approach follows a 30, 60, and 90-day check-in. And so based on those priorities or those, what we call the improvement, those improvement activities, that's what you're going to list out in the 30 days. And then you're going to move to what you're going to address, how you're going to address that in the 60 days, what that looks like. And then you're going to sketch that out into a 90-day timeline. So in each of those cycles, those monthly cycles, you would assign a person from your team or people, because it shouldn't really just be left up to one person. Because you're a team, you should be working together. And then you're going to hold each other accountable by assigning dates. And then who's implicated by the actual activity that you've sketched out, who are the stakeholders, who are all involved to be able to drive the work and move the work forward, who's impacted. That's really, and then what are the needs that are being addressed by achieving this activity? And then you want to keep a monitoring status of how you're moving the work forward. And so this allows the team to all be on board and all be on one page about where you are in the process, and how you are moving forward. So again, remember those questions that you're asking yourself about how are we learning. This holds the team accountable to really stay focused, laser focused on the learning process and how you're learning through each of those activities and getting those barriers out of the way. And so to that end, when you marry the driver diagram with the continuous improvement sample form that we just looked at, this is kind of what it looks like and how it's laid out and sort of how you would format it together. I'll pause there. Are there any questions so far on just the two tools that we have? Okay. And so the only other thing that I'll add, hearing nothing, is that you want to allow your existing data to do the talking. More than likely, you already have collected an abundance of data from your campus that has spoken to what your priorities are for around student basic needs. And so you want to consider that that data is usable as usable data. And so you want to identify your priority areas from, I would recommend probably your top 1 to 2 student basic need priorities. Begin with that as a launch pad to be able to move, to fill out to use the tools and guide your team. Now, when you begin to, the two important things, really important things in terms of being able to build out your team and develop them. Relationship management and communications, those are very, very key skills that you're going to need in being able to drive transformation. You've got to know, you got to make sure that you have the right people at the table that have strong communication skills. And if you're not, the communication skills aren't up to par, that you're doing the work as a team to make sure that you all get on board with a communication strategy that allows you to be able to communicate effectively and being able to level set and to be able to drive the project, to move the project, or else you're sort of setting yourself up for not, we'll say, the most optimal success rather. And so making sure you have the right people, that they're at the right levels and in the right places and just at the right frequency. So here's the thing. You've heard probably this saying about there's more than one way to skin a cat. And that's true in terms of your approach. It's not about, with continuous improvement, it's not about what is the right way to identify and building your team. It is what's the best way or most effective way and strategy and approach to being for your campus. the bottom line is that there are pros and cons to any way that you choose, right? And so you want to make sure that with your team that you're exploring and unpacking what the advantages are and the disadvantages are for any approach that you take to the continuous improvement work, or else you set yourself up for these sort of blind spots and being able to carve out how this can work. And you want to just be able to strategize all of the possibilities and ways that this work can actually be effective and be effective for your campus. Okay, so there's a rumor mill about in higher education, there's this thing called silos, right? Who's heard of it? Yeah, so by show of Zoom hands, how many of you know stakeholder relationships to be anything but complex? I don't know them to be. So stakeholder relationships are can be very complex because they are, the relationships are so variable, and they should be diverse and just different across the board. And so we want to offer up these as broad strokes for how you consider, or some considerations that you take in your approach for your team building. So you definitely want to understand who all of your stakeholders are, what's their level of support for the overall project, and what's the best mode of communication, what's the best strategy of communication, because that's going to drive your project forward or not. So as you are building out your stakeholders, you want to ask yourself, who are your power brokers? And you want to understand what their sphere of influence actually is. So looking at things like or unpacking things like their words, their actions, who are they connected to, and how much weight do they hold? What weight do they hold? And then you want to understand, or have an understanding around their strengths, their interests, not only those two things, because those are important, but also what are the challenges that they can bring to the team, the table, and looking at how those things merge and diverge. Like what directions are they coming together? What sets them apart? And then certainly most important is the diversity of your stakeholder community. And you want to always ask yourself who's represented, but who's not represented. And so we have to challenge ourselves in the beginning of this work and building out your team to ask yourself who might be missing. So being able to, and we're going to look at bias in a moment, but when you're looking at those influential power brokers, sometimes it's not always the people who are speaking up, or who seemingly always have the answers, but who are also those silent players, those ones who don't always speak up, but they do make things happen, right? Yes, Lily.
And I just wanted to add, some campuses, you might have really strong relationships with some of your community partners. Maybe it's your Dare to Care food bank. Maybe it's a mental health clinic that has, open services for folks that are underinsured. And so that could be another partner that would be valuable at your table as you're thinking about how to leverage and maximize and coordinate these services that are available to our students. And the other voice that I would really encourage you to consider is the student voice. And how are you able to include them in this work? And I know that student schedules are challenging and students are super busy. In addition to, having busy classroom schedules, they also have a lot of work and families and those kind of things. So, but just, if you do have students that might be leaders of your food pantry effort, or other student leaders on campus that really do understand what the student experience is, bringing that into this team could offer a really valuable perspective. And I think, help us all do a little bit better with that, awareness of accessibility for, and the holistic, like the comprehensive services that students might need, that we may not be aware of.
Mhm. Critical. Thank you so much, Lily, for that. They are critical power brokers, absolutely, in this process. And to that point, that of Lily's point about your external partners, we want to present this this as a potential launch pad for how you build out your team. So we like to call this our example of a power map. And the science fan in me attempted to resist this analogy with this visual, but I failed miserably, so forgive me. So Hebb's law. Hebb's law tells us that neurons that fire together, wire together. Really simple. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And these little dots, these are like our neurons, right? And these are the people on our campuses. And so what the law tells us is that this is your prime base, this is your home base for being able to prime for spontaneity. This means that the more often you think of things in connection with each other, the more likely your brain recalls them as connected in the future. So we right now, the silos that we sometimes work in sort of keep us separate. They do. They keep us separate and apart, and they keep us from thinking about how the whole system works together and how we are connected, how we're generally connected. And so this power map is a strong example of how we are able to reach across the lines, across our stakeholder community, to be able to draw those connections. So you have these like 4 quadrants, right? And you have those lines. And so that's where you want to try, we really want to do the work of reaching across. But where we're starting with the focus of the project. So that'll be your priority, right? From your driver diagram, that'll be your priority. And that's the focus. And then you want to begin to think about your power brokers, like in the previous discussion that we just had around broad strokes, who those power brokers are for this part of the work. So you're going to identify those very specific key players in those offices that have the connections. And so this is just a visual representation of that makes it easy to see who is represented. And that helps you to break down, should help you to break down who's not represented in this. So you may have, depending upon how your campus hierarchy works, and the priority that you set as your focus for the project, that's where you're going to, how you're going to identify who those players are. The arrows essentially are going to be who's connected to whom, who knows whom, who gets along with whom, who plays well, who plays nicely, who doesn't, right? And then who are the people that can sort of help to bridge those relationships and solidify those relationships for the team. So when we talk about who's not represented, in consideration of designing and building your team, this is the rewiring. So remember, neurons that fire together, wire together. So when we're thinking about ways or traditional ways in which we're used to doing things on our campus, sometimes we miss the people, like the students, like our external partners, to be able to drive work forward. And so it causes this process, or forces us to unlearn many of the things that we're typically used to doing. And so then they would go through this process of relearning. And so I present to you the unbiased, which is essentially a process that helps us to get out of our own way. And in this work, we have to identify, challenge, and dismantle any of the biases that stand to disrupt the next steps in the work. And so these are 4 frequent biases that come up in this type of work. There's a perception bias, where we tend to make decisions that are based on things that we assume to be true, right? But that haven't been proven to be true. There's no evidence that supports that it is true. And then there's the affinity bias, where we tend to lean in favor of the people who look like us, who sound like us, who share a background, who come to the table with similar experiences. And so we're drawn to that by an affinity. And this may not be new, but definitely, worth unpacking as you think about, again, key players who are going to be important in helping us, helping the team do the work. And then there's groupthink, where there tends to be a consensus or agreement with the majority of an opinion. So one person jumps on with an idea, and then the group all comes on board, the rest of the groups, to say that they share in that opinion, but not necessarily. So they're an influence. They're influenced by what the group thinks, not necessarily their individual thoughts and opinions on a particular subject or strategy, or a person who should or should not be a part of the team. And so that groupthink tends to can serve as like a barrier or blocking. And then there's that halo effect, where no, this person cannot do wrong. They're always in the positive lens, despite any contradictory evidence that says that they might not be so great. And they do have some limitations, and they do have some challenges that we probably should explore and consider. So these are just a few biases that you want to begin to unpack and challenge, so that you can move forward in the work. And then there's the next step, with cultivating support. So when you're identified, so that power map, this is how the power map works with communication, with what we call the power or communications matrix. This is where you're garnering and bolstering your support on your campus. And this ties back to that discussion earlier about the complexity around stakeholder relationships, and really knowing who are your supporting players. So it really helps you to unpack where your resources lie, your time resources, your human resources, and where you should be spending, where the most energy should be spent. So as you're exploring who those individuals are, when we talked about those power brokers and that sphere of influence, you have low, moderate, and high. Though each of those individuals will have a degree of influence, a level of influence that is low, moderate, or high, right? And then you want to identify or ask yourself, what's their degree of support? Where does their degree of support lie? Is it more on the resistant end? Or are they one of those more pensive players where they play the devil's advocate, but they also can be, play that middle person where they actually are support, but they ask great questions, right? So it's a balance of yeah, maybe, but maybe not. And then there's that champion, that person, that power broker who is optimistic, who's going to always say, this can work, this is how it can work, and let's get the ball rolling. And so you want to place those people in the boxes based on the level of influence and their degree of support. And that helps you to also fill out that power map that we looked at a little earlier. And so in terms of next steps, and so the next part of our time together will be spent around what we call a pre-mortem exercise. This exercise essentially helps us to step out in front of the work before it begins. Typically in doing work like this, you've probably heard of like a postmortem activities, or even there's this peri work that happens during or within the project, that's embedded within the process. And our typical wiring has conditioned us to be able to collect that type of data once we press start on the project. But the pre-mortem exercise allows us to get organized and positions us to get out in front of the work, and together we'll develop the questions that help us to explore what are our potential roadblocks at the outset of the work. So it's a collaborative exercise whereby we look at what this project holds as potential roadblocks, what's in the way. And so we'll brainwrite and we'll brainstorm rather potential reasons for how this project can fail and why, and what are the potential reasons around that, and how we can present some countermeasures to be able to break those down and move them out of the way so that we can move the work forward. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time together doing. And I'm going to pause there just to switch gears for that part, because that's the fun time. And so what questions might you have around any and all of what has been presented and next steps?
So, Maisha, this is Paul. I've got something to add here. Just in a really practical point, I'm wondering, like, when you come to something like this, come to the community practice, I realize, because we do this kind of work across the country, it's so easy to think, oh my God, how, I thought I was just going to be in a community practice. What if I got to think about stakeholders and, all these different things. But the question is, like, about sustainability of the work, of course, right? And so just one really practical thing to emphasize is you might have your team in mind. You might say to yourself, well, this is myself and 3 colleagues. We've been working on this for, the last couple of years, and that's my team. I just want to say that that's okay. The other way to think about this, though, is once you have your team and you want to start doing impactful work, everything that Maisha says is so critical, because even if you're not doing this kind of stakeholder analysis and work and deep thought around power mapping to figure out, like, who are the important people to have on a team, if you want to talk about how you get the work done, you're still going to have to really think seriously about this. So I just want to underscore that practical point here, that it's a question of, like, sooner or later. So I didn't want you to think, if you came today thinking, okay, I've got my team, it doesn't mean you have to take it all apart. It just means that you could think about this as like a next step of doing that teamwork.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to that point, just want to get a feel for where everyone is in the process for building your teams.
I'll share a bit. We have had on our campus some different teams that have already worked together previously, centered around maybe a specific need. So part of our process is kind of reviewing those groups that either are still meeting or did meet, and kind of seeing those overlapping players, and then kind of looking at what our student basic needs are. And I really liked identifying those improvement projects and maybe using some of that to help identify who the key players might be to start out with, because if we cast a wide net of too many problems, it might be hard to really move forward in anything. So I've already talked to a couple of folks that were involved in some of those other groups, and I plan on next steps, revisiting with them and kind of talking a little bit more through the process, and then seeing how we want to reapproach that as a team.
Wonderful, Lonnie. Would you be open to sharing, like, who on what you've identified, if your team has come to you? You mentioned that possibly discussing the priorities and that you have your team in mind. Would you be open to sharing just with the others, just so that they have an idea of kind of what it looks like at EKU, who your team players are so far?
So I'll give the example of a previous group that had kind of met and did some similar things. It was a Strategies for Hope committee, but the impetus for that one was a particular area that was looking at the needs of our students that come to us from the foster care program. And so it included representatives from the student life and engagement area because of our work with the food pantry, but it also had our representatives from our Student Success Center and areas from our retention and graduation group. And that includes some of the special population programs that we have that are geared toward student parents and also our first gen student groups on our campus too. We also had a financial aid representative and a counseling center representative in that group too that I can remember. So I see a lot of overlap moving forward just in terms of thinking of student basic needs. Obviously, a student voice is critical to have on there. Perhaps a counseling center representative for mental health needs or being that expert in that space, but also to some of the individuals that do that day-to-day work in supporting the students. And then some folks that might be at that bigger arching umbrella that maybe oversees some multiple areas where they can use their resources and their teams to assist as well. But that's kind of where our initial thoughts were in thinking of kind of reforming this group for a continuous improvement team.
Mm-hmm. No, that's excellent. That sounds great, like a great starting point with key players for sure. Particularly for that particular project. I'm curious to know, what was did you all have a particular communication strategy that you used to be able to move the work forward? What worked for you guys and what were some lessons learned?
I think as far as some lessons learned, there were some changes and shifts at the university after that group kind of got going. So, and as will be kind of the same in any sort of team, you'll see people kind of come and go out of roles and that shifting some of the priorities of the divisions and whatnot. So I know some of the particular projects that we talked about in that group, our main communication was we had several series of meetings, and then it kind of moved towards more the department level work and some of the individuals carrying on those projects. And then again, there were several different groups that had kind of overlapping things going on. So I think this might be a great opportunity kind of for a reset and to re-group and re-envision how maybe kind of those silos that you mentioned, we maybe refocus and focus more on those basic student needs and how we can address those overall.
I agree. I support that. Thanks so much for being brave, for braving the way and getting us started. Thanks so much, Lonnie. Is there anyone else who would like to share? I'm excited to hear what other campuses think about any of what has been presented, and what are some initial thoughts, feelings, and we're hearing about where you are in the process for building your team.
I think for NKU, I think we're kind of further along in terms of some of the stuff that was presented today in terms of the building of our teams. We've obviously rolled out our Success by Design a few years ago, which is our strategic plan, very targeted, and the institution is being, I would like to say, very smart in that the resources are all going towards the strategic plan. And so we're being very targeted and aligning everything that we're doing to that. And as part of our strategic plan, we're also one of the institutions that is part of the Greater Cincinnati area's EAB's Moonshot. And so our participation in the Moonshot also has those 4 strategic teams that are also aligned with SBD. So our institution is very much closely coordinated kind of where we're heading for the next few years. And as part of that, those teams have either already been developed or are really, to be honest with you, and deep in the implementation phases right now, is either rolling out initiatives or developing them right now. So I think a lot of the work that we're going to be doing with this group is thinking through kind of those next steps. We've identified some of those areas and have started already to make investments in those areas. And so it's really kind of similar to what EKU has talked about. It's kind of activating some of those groups right now. How do we tie the work that may come out of this group and align it to what we're already doing so that we're being smart and efficient, as well as having a significant impact on our students. So it's kind of a high level overview of where we're at, but just really excited to see what we can do and kind of plug in some of the stuff that we're doing here into the work that we're already working on.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ryan. Yeah, and being a part of the Moonshot Initiative definitely positions you to be able to, I can see that you're ahead of the game. And so I'm excited to be a support and see how the communities of practice really supports the work and pulling all of it together. How do you see, or do you see at all, something like the continuous improvement cycle fitting into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a critical aspect of kind of our whole next steps is the continuous assessment and improvement. One of the exciting things that I'm really looking forward to, and some of the things we've been able to embrace actually over the last couple of years and as we're moving forward, is obviously when you're rolling out all these new initiatives and trying new things, we've taken on kind of the mantra, it's okay to fail, let's just fail fast and learn from it. And so we're trying very unique and new things that are kind of outside the box. And if they don't work, it's okay. We learn from that and then we apply it to what we're going to do next. And by taking some chances, we've uncovered some really cool things that we're now going to start, putting some additional resources on to, again, have as much of a significant impact on our students as possible. So that continuous cycle of improvement, we are continuously assessing. We're rolling, I'm thinking of one particular initiative that we're rolling out and we're assessing it as it's even in development. Are we developing it in the right ways? Are we pulling in the right people to think these things through? And then as we're kind of thinking through what the first couple of months are look like, the biggest question we keep having is, okay, how are we going to assess that this is impacting? How are we going to be able to monitor? With our goal being, we don't want to wait a year to see if the program worked. We want to start looking at weeks in, is it starting to have an impact? And so I'm just trying to think through assessment a little bit differently is kind of also a next step for us. So yes, that continuous improvement is going to be critical in terms of how we assess, not just long-term, but in the short term as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you said something really, the learning is what continuous improvement is all about. And so the wins are in the learning. And so it's very, I'm excited to hear that that's the focus of the team, because that's how we unlearn some of the things that we've been missing, or that we stay more, we stay ahead of the missteps, right? And so I think that's awesome that you guys are really tuned into that.
I just want to also, Ryan, one of the other, I think, really benefits of being in this community of practice is learning from one another. And I know that you've mentioned this, Maisha, but just the work that you all are doing, tried that didn't work or what did work, could also be really helpful to another campus who's trying to start, maybe they're a little bit further or earlier on in this whole process. But certainly we hope to be able to share kind of openly with one another pain points, successes, things that we are learning so that we can all kind of get better. And that is obviously a two-way street, and we want you to grow and gain just as much from other people's experiments and what they've learned as you're able to contribute. So thank you so much. I'd love to know, Gina, I know you're doing a lot, at JCTC with extensive student basic needs and a lot of community engagement to support your students. I don't know if you might be able to share anything with this group as you're kind of thinking about what this team and this continuous improvement cycle might look like.
Yeah, and actually, ironically enough, during this call, I've been a little distracted because we have our Jefferson Safe Stay program. We're having some issues today, 2 students needing emergency housing, and literally on your team, make sure you have the person at the very top to make sure that things move along as they need to. And I agree with what everyone else has said about, that the people that, who support you, who don't. Just a variety of people around the campus, even down to campus security. You need them to know who you are and have your back. For us, maintenance and operations, they're the ones that pick up our Dare to Care. They are our biggest supporters. Housekeeping, we like this week we have a 1,000-pound Dare to Care order coming to campus. If it wasn't for our M&O team, we wouldn't be able to do that and provide that to our students and staff who use it. So yeah, that's all I have now. And I apologize for not being as engaged, but I'm dealing with text and email during the call. So
Thank you for being here, Dina. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gina, for that. It's and no worries, no apology. We understand that the nature of where we work requires us to wear many hats. So we're all often multitasking, and it's fine. So no worries. I just want to make sure that I have hit all questions. Any questions, any last minute burning questions for next steps that we can answer, where we can support you in being able to, wherever you are in the process. We just want to make sure that we make space for making sure that everyone is comfortable with the next parts of the work.
Maisha, did you go over the next parts of the work? Like a timeline? What is the, I don't know. I don't know.
Let's see. So it would be determined by whenever the next community of practice is. So do you have the dates for that, Lily?
Okay, so our communities of practice are going to be meeting around these professional development topics, this webinar series. And the way that those are going to be structured is it's an 1.5-hour meeting from 12 to 1:30 every other Tuesday, February through March. And it's open to everyone, but we will have the first 45 minutes will be our speaker. We'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A kind of with that speaker if needed. Or we'll go straight into breakouts. And we were going to do just kind of random breakouts so that you're not just with your own campus team and kind of taking, but really that you're sharing and you're learning from other campuses. And maybe it's connected to the topic of the discussion, but it could honestly be whatever's on the mind of the breakout group. And so that is the way that we're kind of thinking these next couple of months of community of practice meetings are going to go. I know that we had talked about an advance of sorts with the 7 campuses that were interested in the continuous improvement cycle. And so in order to find good dates that work for your campus teams, I think that we can put out a doodle poll for what's looking like February or March for maybe a couple of shorter sessions, virtual meetings where, it's time for you all as a team to work on your driver diagrams or to work on plugging that driver diagram into a continuous improvement cycle kind of chart. We are also planning to integrate the work of your team into the Student Success Summit, which is scheduled for April 11 and 12. And so that summit, please save the date, but day 1 is going to be kind of your traditional sessions. And then day 2 is going to be team time and really like facilitated work in progress around specific initiatives that your campus is engaged in with CPE. So those are some of the next steps, Maisha, as I've kind of thought about the broader student success, student basic needs, community of practice. I did think or anticipate that this group would have some more just these 7 campuses working together as they're working on those driver diagrams or the continuous improvement cycle document. So they obviously need to set their teams as kind of the most immediate next priority, though, is to communicate who they want on that team for communications.
One quick thing to add here, this is Paul. Any of you, and first of all, I'm really excited about just to hear from Lonnie and Ryan and Gina. I mean, that just, it's going to be rich. I can tell there's lots of activity. You already have lots of good thinking and energy on this. And so I'm excited. But before, during, after any of those sort of concrete dates that Lily just shared, we're available to hop in and help you with any of these things, especially if you're at the front end of trying to think about how you want to set something up. We, of course, can get with you and work with you individually so you can, meet any kinds of deadlines that the community of practice requires. So we just want to let you know that we're here to help.
Okay. And so that wraps us up for for today. And so I'll slide it back over to you, Lily, for your closeout and impact exchange.
Okay, great. So I'll just kind of repeat that back just so I understand. I think that the next step is for campus teams to be identified. If you already have a campus team and you're going to start there and then maybe branch out down the road, that's fine. It would be great if you all wouldn't mind emailing me who you at this point in the process would like to be a part of your campus team. And if we can do that by January 31st, that would be wonderful. Feel free to take this back to your other campus partners, and we'll send out the slides and the recording from this meeting if that's helpful as you kind of identify your teams. And then, so by January 31st, we'll have a good sense of all of the folks that are going to need to be in this kind of special slice of our community of practice. In which case we can work with SOVA again to figure out if it's ideal to integrate the work time into those workshop dates, where maybe we can do we can customize whoever is in a breakout room. And so we can do some special things with your 7 campuses and then have kind of general breakouts for the other folks that might be attending the PD. If that's the best way to move forward, then we can do that. We can kind of send out an email and get your insights on what do you think would be best for identifying or for creating that driver diagram and continuous improvement cycle. Phyllis, I see your hand is up.
Yes, hey everybody, just want to let you know I sent you an email to seek your approval to put you on the distribution list. So as soon as you're able to see that and say yay, just email me back and I will get you on there. That's all, Lily. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so that is the most immediate next step. If we can just, and let me know if you have any challenge identifying your campus team by the 31st, that's not a problem either. But that'll help us as we move forward. And now I do want to just kind of share my screen briefly here. I know there's 5 minutes left of this conversation. The collaborative is launching a platform that will be really targeted to supporting our work in these communities of practice. This platform is called, well, we're calling it the Impact Exchange. It's through a vendor called Inscribe. Perhaps you've heard of them. They do work with a lot of college campuses and building cohorts and, exchanging knowledge, ideas, and questions among students. But we are obviously using that for our practitioners in across all of our colleges and universities. So we do have a channel here. This is going to launch when our newsletter goes out, probably today or tomorrow. And we are kind of this community of practice is our test case. So we're doing a soft launch, but we're really going to be using it with our community of practice. And so basically we have loaded in, 12 resources or so, really great playbooks, handbooks, research reports, et cetera, on a variety of student basic needs issues. And that's great. It's kind of hopefully a central warehouse for resources that will be valuable to you, not just on this topic, but on any topic of student success. We're going to keep pumping resources into here. But the most valuable part is when our community starts a conversation. And so like Ryan, you could throw out there, focused on emergency aid programs, looking for best practices in stretching your dollars, or whatever your question might be to the community. EKU could respond and say, this is what we were able to do with ours, and we saw this return. Or, JCTC could say, we've partnered with this philanthropy organization to like 2 for $1 our dollars that we can raise. I mean, people can share all sorts of ideas. It doesn't just have to be, here's a research article. It's your own experience. And the point of this platform is to recognize that that there is so much knowledge, experience, and expertise in our campuses, and that we're trying to just create this opportunity for folks to share it with one another. Now, obviously, this platform is a little bare bones right now because, well, it doesn't exist yet, but it needs people interacting with it in order for it to become a really robust resource for our state. And so that's what we're just going to seed through this student basic needs community of practice. We'll post resources through here. We'll encourage conversations to be had, like kind of through the platform as opposed to over email or a listserv kind of model. And hopefully, then the next round, maybe next year, we'll have a new wave of campuses that want to participate in this kind of continuous improvement work. if they search a question and there's already been a Q&A and a resource attached, they'll be able to see it already. So these conversations don't have to be rehashed every 3 months or every time there's transition of staff. You know, this is going to be hopefully a great resource that allows us to consolidate and kind of centralize our knowledge and our resources. So you'll be hearing a lot more about that. We will certainly introduce it at any of our upcoming professional development webinars, any of our meetings, but I just kind of wanted to give you all a sneak peek. Okay, well, I so appreciate you all being here. I will send a follow-up email with these next steps, with the PowerPoint deck and with the webinar dates and the slides and all of that. So look forward to seeing you all again soon, okay?
Thanks,
All right,
everybody, for your
welcome.
time. Take
I hope
care.
Thank
everybody-
you.
Well, have a good one.